The smell of sulfur and sweat clung to Laura Vance's skin, like a second layer, as she hauled another bucket of ore from the depths of the Silver Crown mine, her shoulders burning with exhaustion, even though the morning sun had barely crested the Nevada mountains. She had been working in the Elko mine for 6 months now, ever since Marcus Thornton had bought her contract from the gambling hall where she had once dealt cards, claiming he needed workers and that her debts would be paid off through honest labor. That promise had been a lie wrapped in legal documents she barely understood, signed in desperation when the alternative had been far worse. Now, at 23 years old, Laura found herself trapped in a nightmare of endless tunnels and crushing darkness, working 16-hour days alongside men who looked at her with a mixture of pity and helplessness, knowing they could do nothing against Thornton's iron grip on this corner of Nevada. The year was 1883. And Elko had grown from a railroad town into a mining hub where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the richness of a vein. Marcus Thornton owned half the businesses in town and most of the law, his wealth built on the backs of workers he treated like property. Laura had learned quickly that asking for help meant punishment, that trying to leave meant being hunted down by Thornton's hired men, and that the law turned a blind eye when money changed hands. Her hands bled through the thin cloth she had wrapped around them that morning, the calluses that had formed in the first weeks now cracked and raw. The bucket she carried weighed at least 60 pounds, and her arms trembled as she dumped it into the ore cart at the tunnel entrance. The foreman, a thick-necked man named Dutch, barely glanced at her before jerking his thumb back toward the shaft. "Get moving, Vance. Thornton wants twice the output today. Some investors coming through tomorrow wants to show them how productive his operation is." Laura wanted to scream that she could barely stand, that she had not eaten since yesterday morning when they had been given stale bread and weak coffee, that her lungs burned from the dust and her back felt like it might snap. Instead, she nodded and picked up the empty bucket, her legs shaking as she turned back toward the darkness. That was when she heard the commotion above ground, voices raised in argument, the sound of horses, and then a sharp crack that might have been a fist meeting flesh. Laura paused at the mouth of the tunnel, squinting against the bright Nevada sunlight that seemed impossibly harsh after hours in the dim lamplight below. A man stood in the center of the mine yard, dust settling around his boots. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar, and a face that bore the weathered look of someone who spent his life outdoors. He wore typical cowboy clothing, practical denim and leather, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. But what caught Laura's attention was not his appearance but the way he stood, calm and unmovable, while 3 of Thornton's men circled him like wolves. "I am looking for Marcus Thornton," the stranger said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. It was a good voice, deep and steady, with an accent that suggested he came from somewhere further south, maybe Texas or New Mexico. "I have business with him." Dutch had emerged from the tunnel supervisor's shack, his face already red with anger. "Mr. Thornton does not see people without appointments. You can leave a message at his office in town." The stranger tilted his head slightly, and even from her position at the tunnel mouth, Laura could see the faint smile that crossed his face. It was not a friendly expression. "I think he will want to see me. Name is Ryder Garrison. Tell him I am here about the water rights he tried to steal from my family's ranch." The name meant nothing to Laura, but she saw Dutch's expression change, uncertainty flickering across his brutal features. Everyone in this part of Nevada knew that water rights were worth killing over, that disputes could turn bloody in a heartbeat. Dutch spat into the dirt and jerked his head at one of the younger men. "Go fetch Mr. Thornton. Tell him there is a garrison here causing trouble." The young man ran off toward the mine office, a sturdy building that sat on the hillside overlooking the operation. Laura knew Thornton spent most of his mornings there, reviewing the previous day's output and planning how to squeeze more profit from his ventures. She should get back to work before Dutch noticed her watching, but something about the scene unfolding kept her frozen in place. Ryder Garrison stood easy in the middle of that hostile space, his hands loose at his sides, not touching his gun but clearly aware of its presence. His eyes swept the mine yard, taking in the ore carts, the entrance to the tunnels, the exhausted workers who had paused in their labors to watch. When his gaze passed over Laura, it stopped, came back, and lingered. Even at this distance, she felt the impact of that look. His eyes were light, maybe blue or gray, startling against his sun-darkened skin. They widened slightly when he took in her appearance, the way she swayed on her feet, the blood on her hands, the hollow exhaustion that must have been written all over her face. "That woman needs water," Ryder said suddenly, his attention snapping back to Dutch. "And food by the look of it," Dutch laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That is none of your concern, cowboy. The workers here are Mr. Thornton's business. She looks half dead. She works for Mr. Thornton. What he does with his workers is his affair." Something shifted in Ryder's expression, a hardening that made Laura's breath catch. He took a step toward Dutch, then another, moving with a predator's grace. "His workers? Is that what you call them? Because from where I am standing, that looks like forced labor." Dutch's hand went to the club he carried at his belt, but before he could draw it, Ryder had closed the distance between them. What happened next was almost too fast for Laura to follow. One moment Dutch was reaching for his weapon. The next, he was on his knees in the dirt. Ryder's hand locked around his wrist in a grip that made the larger man cry out. "I suggest you fetch your boss," Ryder said quietly, his voice deadly calm, "before this gets any uglier." The other guards had their hands on their guns now, but none of them seemed eager to draw. There was something about Ryder Garrison that suggested pulling a weapon on him would be a very bad idea, a coiled danger that radiated from him like heat from a stove. He released Dutch with a slight push that sent the foreman sprawling, then stepped back, his hands again hanging loose and ready. The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut when Marcus Thornton emerged from his office, the young messenger trailing behind him. Thornton was a man in his late 40s, well-dressed in a way that was unusual for a mining camp, his suit expensive and his boots polished to a high shine. He had the look of someone who had once been handsome but had let soft living blur the edges, his face fleshy and his belly straining against his vest. But his eyes were sharp and cold, the eyes of a man who viewed the world as something to be owned and controlled. "Ryder Garrison," Thornton said, his voice smooth as oil. "I heard your father sent someone to discuss the creek situation. I did not expect him to send a son." "My father died 3 months ago," Ryder said flatly. "Heart gave out after spending every day worrying about how you were trying to steal his water. I am here to tell you that theft ends now." Thornton's expression did not change, but Laura saw calculation flicker in those cold eyes. "I am sorry for your loss. Your father was a stubborn man, but the water rights are a legal matter, and I have lawyers handling it. There is nothing to discuss here." "There is plenty to discuss," Ryder said, "starting with you dropping your false claim and ending with you paying restitution for the damage you have done to my family's ranch. But first, you are going to get that woman some water and food, and you are going to tell me what kind of contract has her working until she can barely stand." Thornton's gaze flicked to Laura, and his lips thinned with annoyance. "Miss Vance is working off a debt she incurred through gambling and other activities. It is all perfectly legal, documented and filed with the territory. She is free to leave whenever she pays what she owes." "How much does she owe?" "That is between me and her." "How much?" Thornton's jaw tightened. He was not a man accustomed to being challenged, especially not in front of his workers. $2,000, plus interest and the cost of her room and board. Call it $3,000 total. Laura felt her heart sink. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. She would die in this mine before she could earn that much. Not when Thornton controlled her wages and charged her for every scrap of food, every night in the cramped bunkhouse where the workers slept. Ryder was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "I will pay it." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Laura stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. Thornton's eyebrows rose, and Dutch, still picking himself up from the dirt, looked between the two men with confusion. "You will pay her debt?" Thornton said slowly. "You do not even know this woman." "I know what forced labor looks like," Ryder said, "and I know that no gambling debt is worth what you are doing to her, $3,000. I will have it transferred from my bank in Carson City within the week. You release her contract now, today, and give me documentation that her debt is paid in full." Thornton studied Ryder with the intensity of a card, sharp trying to spot a bluff. "You are serious. Dead serious. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Planning to hold her contract yourself?" Ryder's voice went flat and dangerous. "I am buying her freedom, Thornton. She walks out of here with me, no strings attached. You get your money, she gets her life back, unless you want to tell me that there is some other reason you want to keep her here." The implication in those words was clear, and Laura saw color rise in Thornton's face. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might order his men to throw Ryder off the property or worse. But Thornton was, above all else, a businessman. $3,000 was $3,000, and there was no percentage in starting a war with the Garrisons over one worker when there were always more desperate people who could be exploited. "Fine," Thornton said curtly. "I will draw up the papers, but I want a promissory note today, signed and witnessed, and she does not leave this property until the money is in my account. The note you will get, but she leaves with me now. You have my word the money will be there, and if a Garrison's word is not good enough for you, you can take it up with my lawyers." They stared at each other, two men locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Thornton nodded, a sharp jerk of his head. "Dutch, escort Miss Vance to the office. She can clean herself up while we handle the paperwork." Dutch looked like he wanted to argue, but Thornton's glare silenced him. He grabbed Laura's arm, not gently, and started pulling her toward the office. She stumbled, her exhausted legs nearly giving out, and suddenly Ryder was there, his hand closing over Dutch's wrist. "I will escort her," Ryder said quietly. "You go help your boss with the papers." For a moment, Laura thought Dutch would refuse, would start the fight that had been brewing since Ryder arrived. But something in Ryder's eyes, some promise of violence that lurked just beneath the surface, made Dutch release her arm and step back, muttering under his breath. Ryder's hand was gentle on her elbow, supporting her weight as they walked toward the office building. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought, probably 6 feet or more, and she could feel the strength in him, the coiled muscle and bone that came from years of hard work. He smelled like leather and horse and clean sweat, so different from the sulfur and desperation that had become her constant companions. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "I think so," Laura managed, though her legs felt like water. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Ryder said simply. "And because my mother raised me to believe that turning away from someone in need makes you just as guilty as the person causing the harm." They reached the office, and Thornton brushed past them, already barking orders at his clerk to prepare the documents. Ryder guided Laura to a chair in the corner, then crossed to a water pitcher on a side table. He filled a tin cup and brought it to her, pressing it into her shaking hands. "Drink slowly," he said. "You are dehydrated. Too much too fast will make you sick." Laura sipped the water, and it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, cool and clean and perfect. She wanted to gulp it down, to drain the cup and beg for more, but she followed Ryder's advice, taking small swallows while her body screamed for more. He watched her with those startling eyes, and she saw anger there, a deep and abiding fury at what had been done to her. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 6 months, feels like 6 years. And before that, I worked in a gambling hall, dealt cards mostly, served drinks. I was good at it, made decent money. But the owner got in trouble with some men from San Francisco, bad men, and he sold the place to pay them off. The new owners were worse. They said I owed them for the losses the previous owner had incurred, that I was part of the assets they had purchased. When I tried to leave, they sold my contract to Thornton. Ryder's jaw tightened. "That is not legal. You cannot sell a person's labor for someone else's debt." "Try telling that to a judge who is on Thornton's payroll," Laura said bitterly. "I went to the law. They told me to honor my contracts and stop causing trouble. Thornton has this whole town wrapped around his finger." "Not for much longer," Ryder said grimly. "Once we get you out of here, you are going to tell me everything, every detail of how this happened, and then we are going to see about getting some real justice." Laura wanted to believe him, but 6 months in the mine had taught her that hope was a dangerous thing. Still, looking into his eyes, seeing the determination there, she felt something long dormant stir in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere could actually do what he promised. Thornton emerged from his inner office with a stack of papers, his expression sour. "Everything is here, promissory note for $3,000, payable within 7 days. Release of contract for Laura Vance, contingent on payment received. And a liability waiver stating that you are taking responsibility for her actions from this point forward." Ryder read through the documents carefully, his expression intent. Laura could see intelligence in the way his eyes moved over the legal language, the way he paused at certain phrases and clauses. He was no uneducated ranch hand, that was clear. Finally he nodded and pulled a pen from the inkwell on Thornton's desk. The liability waiver is not necessary, Ryder said, as he signed the promissory note with a bold, clear signature. Miss Vance is a free woman and responsible for her own actions, but I will sign the rest. Thornton snatched the papers as soon as Ryder finished, examining the signature with narrow eyes. Then he pulled out another document, this one already prepared, and thrust it at Laura. Sign this. It states that your debt to me is satisfied upon receipt of payment from Ryder Garrison, and that you relinquish any claim to wages or compensation for your time here. Laura's hand shook as she took the pen, but her signature was legible. She had signed away her freedom 6 months ago with similar documents. Now she was signing it back, and the irony was not lost on her. Thornton witnessed the signature, then stamped both documents with an official-looking seal. You have 7 days, Garrison, Thornton said. If the money is not in my account by then, I send men after her, and I prosecute you for fraud. Understood? The money will be there, Ryder said. He held out his hand to Laura, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs trembled, but his steady presence kept her upright. We are done here. They walked out of the office into the bright afternoon sun, and Laura felt like she was stepping into a dream. The other workers watched from their positions around the yard, their faces showing a mixture of emotions, envy, hope, resignation. She wanted to tell them she would come back for them somehow, that she would find a way to help, but she knew those were empty promises. Getting herself free was miracle enough. Ryder's horse was tied to a post near the mine entrance, a beautiful bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a deep chest. Ryder untied the reins and turned to Laura, his expression concerned. Can you ride? I have not been on a horse in months, but yes, I know how. We are going to ride double until we get to town. There is a boarding house there, run by a woman named Mrs. Chen. She is good people, discreet, and she does not answer to Thornton. You can get cleaned up, rest, and eat properly. Tomorrow, we will figure out the next steps. Laura nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Ryder mounted in one smooth motion, then reached down to pull her up behind him. It took her 3 tries to get her foot in the stirrup, her exhausted muscles barely responding, but finally she was settled behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. The closeness was startling, intimate in a way that made her acutely aware of how long it had been since she had touched another person with anything other than fear or exhaustion. They rode away from the Silver Crown mine at an easy pace, conscious of Laura's weakened state. Behind them, she could hear Thornton shouting orders, the mine returning to its normal rhythm of exploitation and suffering. She tightened her grip on Ryder's waist and let herself believe, just for a moment, that this was real, that she was actually free. The ride to Elko took less than an hour, but by the time they arrived, Laura was barely conscious, exhaustion and relief combining to drag her towards sleep. She was dimly aware of Ryder dismounting, of his strong arms lifting her down from the horse, of being carried up a set of stairs while a woman's voice spoke in rapid, concerned tones. Then she was in a bed, a real bed with clean sheets and a soft pillow, and she was asleep before she could even form a thought of gratitude. When Laura woke, the room was dark except for a lamp burning low on a bedside table. She lay still for a long moment, disoriented, convinced she was about to wake up in the workers' bunkhouse and discover this had all been a desperate dream. But the mattress beneath her was too soft, the air too clean, and when she turned her head, she saw Ryder Garrison sitting in a chair by the door, his head tilted back against the wall, apparently asleep. She pushed herself up slowly, and the movement made him stir. His eyes opened immediately, alert, and he straightened in the chair. "You are awake," he said. "How do you feel?" "Like I have been trampled by a herd of cattle," Laura said honestly. "But better than I did. What time is it?" "About 3 in the morning. You have been asleep for almost 12 hours. 12 hours. Laura could not remember the last time she had slept for more than 4 or 5 hours at a stretch. Her body ached, but it was a different kind of ache now, the pain of muscles finally allowed to rest rather than the agony of constant strain. She looked down at herself and realized she was wearing a clean nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Mrs. Chen helped you wash and change," Ryder said, seeing her confusion. "She is the woman who runs this place. She also put salve on your hands and back, said you were covered in cuts and bruises." Laura looked at her hands and saw they were bandaged, the cloth clean and white. She could smell something medicinal, an herbal scent she did not recognize. "I should thank her." You will have time for that. Right now, you should eat. Mrs. Chen left food. As if summoned by his words, Laura's stomach cramped with hunger so intense it was painful. Ryder rose and crossed to a small table where a tray sat covered with a cloth. He brought it to her, and when he lifted the cover, Laura nearly wept. There was bread, still warm, with butter and honey, cold chicken, sliced apples, cheese, and a bowl of soup that smelled like heaven. She ate slowly at first, mindful of Ryder's earlier warning about taking things easy, but as her stomach woke up, she devoured everything on the tray with single-minded intensity. Ryder watched her with a slight smile, saying nothing, just letting her eat in peace. When the tray was empty, Laura leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes, feeling more human than she had in months. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Ryder said. "What Thornton was doing to you was wrong. No one should have to live like that." "But $3,000, Laura said, opening her eyes to look at him. "That is a fortune. Why would you spend that on a stranger?" Ryder was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly than she had at the mine. He was younger than she had first thought, probably around 26 or 27, with strong features and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, despite the seriousness of the current situation. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, thin and white, and his hands were calloused from hard work. "My father spent his whole life fighting men like Thornton," Ryder finally said. "Men who think money gives them the right to own other people's lives. When I saw you standing there, barely able to stay on your feet, with that bastard talking about you like you were property, all I could think was that my father would have done the same thing. Maybe I am paying that debt for him, in a way, making sure his fight meant something." There was grief in his voice, fresh and raw, and Laura realized his father's death was still a recent wound. "I am sorry about your father," she said softly. "He sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," Ryder said. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery when he thought someone was being treated unfairly. He taught me that a man's worth is not measured in how much land he owns or how many cattle he runs, but in how he treats people who cannot fight back. Guess that lesson stuck." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Laura found herself studying him, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and turned her world upside down. She wanted to know more about him, wanted to understand what kind of man would risk so much for someone he had just met. But exhaustion was pulling at her again, the food and the warmth and the safety of the room making her eyelids heavy. "You should sleep more," Ryder said, seeing her struggle. "Your body needs time to recover." "What about you? You cannot sit in that chair all night." "I have slept in worse places," Ryder said with a slight smile. "Besides, someone needs to keep watch. Thornton has no reason to come after you yet, not until the 7 days are up, but I do not trust him not to try something stupid." Laura wanted to argue, but she was already drifting, the soft bed and the presence of someone watching over her combining to pull her under. Her last coherent thought was that she needed to find a way to truly thank this man, to make him understand what his kindness meant. Then sleep claimed her, deep and dreamless and healing. The next several days passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a tiny Chinese woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had come to Nevada during the railroad boom, following her husband who worked on the tracks, and had stayed after he died, building a boarding house that catered to the few decent people passing through Elko. She fussed over Laura like a mother hen, bringing her food and medicine, checking her injuries, and refusing to answer any of Laura's questions about payment. "Mr. Garrison has handled everything," Mrs. Chen said firmly when Laura tried to discuss money. "You focus on getting strong again, time enough to worry about other things later." Ryder came by twice a day, morning and evening, to check on Laura's progress. He never stayed long, always mindful of propriety, but those brief visits became the highlight of Laura's day. They talked about safe things at first, the weather, the news from other parts of Nevada, the rebuilding of the ranch Ryder had inherited, but gradually, as Laura grew stronger, their conversations deepened. She learned that Ryder had grown up on the ranch his father had built from nothing, learning to ride almost before he could walk. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, and how his father had never remarried, pouring all his energy into the ranch and into raising his son to be a good man. The fight with Thornton over water rights had started 2 years ago when Thornton had tried to dam the creek that ran through both properties, claiming an old survey gave him control of the water source. "My father knew it was a false claim," Ryder said, his voice tight with old anger. "But Thornton had lawyers and politicians in his pocket, and fighting him meant spending money we did not have. It wore my father down, the stress of it. The doctor said his heart just gave out. But I know it was Thornton who killed him, as surely as if he had put a gun to his head." Laura understood that kind of anger, that sense of helpless rage at injustice. She told him about her own past, about growing up in a mining camp in California, about losing her parents to cholera when she was 16, about making her way to Nevada and finding work where she could. The gambling hall had been the best job she had ever had, respectable and well paid, until everything fell apart. "I thought I was being smart," she said bitterly. "Thought I was making a good life for myself. But it all disappeared so fast, and I had no one to turn to, no family, no friends with enough power to stand up to men like Thornton." "You have someone now," Ryder said quietly. "I meant what I said about getting justice. Once you are strong enough, we are going to Carson City. I have friends there, people who owe my father favors. We are going to make sure what Thornton did to you gets exposed, that the laws he used to trap you get challenged." The determination in his voice made Laura's heart ache. She was starting to understand that Ryder Garrison was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man trying to do right in a world that often rewarded cruelty. And she was also starting to realize that her feelings for him were becoming more than simple gratitude. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. She would catch herself watching him when he was not looking, admiring the way he moved, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes. She found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that had nothing to do with needing protection, and everything to do with simply wanting to be near him. And sometimes, when their eyes met, she thought she saw something similar in his gaze, a warmth that went beyond simple compassion. On the 5th day after her rescue, Laura was finally strong enough to leave her room. Mrs. Chen had found her proper clothing, a simple dress of blue cotton that fit reasonably well, and had even produced a pair of boots that were only slightly too large. Laura dressed carefully, conscious of her injuries, but determined to move forward. She could not hide in this room forever, no matter how tempting that seemed. She made her way downstairs to the boarding house's small dining room, where Mrs. Chen was preparing lunch. The older woman looked up with a smile of approval. "You look much better, color in your cheeks again." "I feel better," Laura said honestly. "Thanks to you and Mr. Garrison." Mrs. Chen waved off the thanks with a flour-dusted hand. "You sit. I make you soup." Laura sat at the worn wooden table and watched Mrs. Chen work, her movements efficient and practiced. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if not fancy, with the kind of lived-in warmth that came from a place that was truly someone's home rather than just a business. Laura felt a pang of longing for something like this, a place of her own, a life that was not built on fear and uncertainty. "Mrs. Chen," Laura said hesitantly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, child. Mr. Garrison, has he truly paid for my stay here? I do not want to be a charity case. Mrs. Chen turned from the stove, her expression serious. "That young man paid for a month's room and board, plus extra for the doctoring you needed. But I tell you this, it is not charity when someone helps another person who needs it. It is being human. You accept his help, you get strong, and then you live a good life. That is the best way to honor his kindness." Before Laura could respond, the front door opened and Ryder walked in, his hat in his hands. He stopped when he saw Laura at the table, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "You are up. That is good to see." Laura felt warmth spread through her chest at his smile. "I could not stay in that room any longer. I was starting to feel like a prisoner again, even if it was a comfortable prison." Ryder crossed to the table and sat down across from her, his presence immediately making the room feel smaller, more intimate. "I am glad you are feeling better. I have news." Something in his tone made Laura's stomach tighten with nervousness. "What kind of news?" "I sent a telegram to Carson City, to a federal marshal I know. Told him about your situation and about some of the other things Thornton has been doing. He is interested, very interested. Apparently there have been complaints about Thornton from other territories, accusations of labor violations and fraud. If you are willing to testify, to tell your story officially, It could be the opening they need to investigate him properly. Laura's heart began to race. The thought of standing up against Thornton, of publicly accusing him, was both terrifying and deeply appealing. What would happen to the other workers at the mine if I do this? If Thornton gets investigated and the mine gets shut down, they lose their jobs. They lose jobs that are killing them, Ryder said gently. And most of them are probably in the same situation you were, trapped by debt contracts and legal manipulation. If the investigation goes forward, they might get freed too. It is a risk, but it is the kind of risk worth taking. Laura thought about the men she had worked alongside, the ones who had looked at her with pity, but had been too beaten down by their own circumstances to help. She thought about the endless tunnels and the sulfur-thick air, and the knowledge that each day might be her last. She thought about the women who would come after her, the ones Thornton would trap and exploit unless someone stood up and said no more. I will do it, she said firmly. I will testify. Tell your Marshall friend, I will tell him everything. Ryder reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and strong. Thank you. I know this is not easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, Laura said, echoing something her father used to say. She looked down at their joined hands, conscious of the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. When she looked back up, Ryder was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Laura, he said softly, her name sounding different in his voice, intimate and precious. I need to tell you something. Mrs. Chen chose that moment to bustle over with bowls of soup, breaking the moment. Ryder released Laura's hand and sat back, but his eyes never left her face. They ate in a silence that hummed with unspoken words, and Laura found herself wishing desperately that Mrs. Chen would disappear for just a few minutes, give them the privacy to finish whatever Ryder had been about to say. After lunch, Ryder suggested a walk, if Laura felt up to it. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly and shooed them out the door, and Laura found herself walking down the dusty streets of Elko with Ryder at her side, conscious of the curious looks from townspeople who recognized her from before her time at the mine. They are staring, Laura said quietly. Let them stare, Ryder replied. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You survived something that would have broken most people. They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the Nevada mountains rose in the distance, stark and beautiful against the endless sky. Ryder found a spot under a twisted juniper tree, and they sat, looking out over the desert landscape. What were you going to say? Laura asked, back at the boarding house before Mrs. Chen interrupted. Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his profile strong against the bright sky. When he spoke, his voice was low and a little rough. I was going to say that I think I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and completely unexpected. Laura turned to stare at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. You barely know me. I know enough, Ryder said, turning to meet her gaze. I know you are brave and strong and that you have been through hell, but you have not let it destroy who you are. I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it feels like the sun coming out. I know that I cannot stop thinking about you, that every moment I am not with you feels incomplete. Maybe that is not love yet. Maybe it is just the beginning of it. But I wanted you to know. I wanted to be honest with you because you deserve honesty after all the lies you have been told. Laura felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. I thought I was losing my mind, she said, her voice shaking. I thought I was imagining that there was something between us, or that I was just confused because you saved me. But I feel it too, Ryder, this connection, this pull toward you. It scares me because I have never felt anything like it before. Ryder reached up and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek, his touch achingly tender. You do not have to be scared. I am not going anywhere, and I am not asking you for anything you are not ready to give. I just wanted you to know how I feel, so you could make your own choices with all the information. Laura laughed, the sound watery but genuine. That is very practical of you. My father always said honesty saves a lot of trouble down the road, Ryder said with a slight smile. Then his expression grew serious again. But I mean it, Laura. No pressure, no expectations. You have been through enough without me adding to your burdens. If all you want from me is friendship and help getting justice against Thornton, that is what you will get. Laura looked at him, this good, honest man who had charged into her life like a hero from a dime novel, except He was real and complicated and imperfect, and so much better than any fictional character. She thought about the fear and exhaustion that had been her constant companions for months, and about how different she felt now, sitting here with him. She thought about the future, uncertain and daunting, and about how much less frightening it seemed with Ryder beside her. "What if I want more than friendship?" she asked softly. Ryder's breath caught, and Laura saw hope flare in his eyes. "Then I would be the happiest man in Nevada," he said simply. Laura leaned forward, and Ryder met her halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the forced advances she had endured from drunk men at the gambling hall or the leering looks from Thornton's guards. This was warmth and safety, and a connection that went beyond physical attraction, though that was certainly present too. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Ryder's hand was tangled in her hair. "I am falling in love with you too," Laura whispered. "I do not know if that is wise or practical, but it is true." "Then we will be unwise and impractical together," Ryder said, and kissed her again. They sat under that juniper tree for a long time, talking and kissing and planning a future that felt more possible with every passing moment. Ryder told her about the ranch, about his plans to rebuild it into something his father would be proud of. Laura talked about her dreams, the ones she had buried during her time at the mine, dreams of having a real home, maybe opening a business of her own, living a life where every day was not a struggle for survival. "You could come to the ranch," Ryder said hesitantly. "Not as anything other than a guest, at least at first, but there is plenty of space, and you would be safe there. Mrs. Patterson, who has been cooking for us since I was a kid, would love to have another woman around, and it would give you time to figure out what you want to do next, away from Elko and Thornton's influence." The offer was tempting, almost irresistibly so, but Laura forced herself to think clearly, to not let her growing feelings for Ryder push her into another situation where she was dependent on someone else's charity. "I need to be able to support myself," she said carefully. "I cannot go from being Thornton's prisoner to being your responsibility." "It would not be like that," Ryder said, but Laura could see understanding in his eyes. "But I get it. You need to feel like you are standing on your own feet. What if we make it official employment? The ranch always needs help, especially now that I am trying to rebuild. You could work in the house, help Mrs. Patterson with the cooking and cleaning, maybe handle some of the bookkeeping. I am terrible at paperwork. I would pay you a fair wage, same as I would pay anyone else." Laura considered the offer. It was a compromise, a way to maintain her independence while still accepting help. And the thought of being near Ryder, of having time to explore these new feelings without the immediate pressure of survival, was deeply appealing. "All right," she said finally. "But if at any point I feel like I am taking advantage of your kindness, or if this arrangement becomes uncomfortable, I reserve the right to leave." "Deal," Ryder said, holding out his hand for a formal shake. Laura took it, but instead of shaking, she pulled him close for another kiss, feeling him smile against her lips. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Ryder made the final arrangements to transfer the money to Thornton's account. Laura gave her statement to the federal marshal who arrived from Carson City, and Mrs. Chen packed Laura a bag of supplies for the journey to the ranch. The marshal, a grizzled man named Hayes, listened to Laura's story with growing anger, taking careful notes and asking detailed questions about the contracts she had signed and the conditions at the mine. "This is exactly what we needed," Marshal Hayes said when Laura finished. "Thornton has been careful to stay just on the right side of legal, but what you are describing crosses the line into forced labor and fraud. Combined with the other complaints we have received, we have enough to open a formal investigation. It might take time, but we will get him." "What about the other workers?" Laura asked. "Once the investigation is official, we can secure their release pending the outcome. Thornton will not be happy, but he will not have a choice." "You did a brave thing, Miss Vance. A lot of people are going to be free because you were willing to speak up." The praise made Laura uncomfortable, but she accepted it with as much grace as she could manage. She had not thought of herself as brave, just desperate and angry. But maybe that was what bravery was, doing the right thing even when you were terrified. On the morning they were scheduled to leave for the ranch, Thornton himself appeared at the boarding house. Ryder was loading the wagon while Laura said her goodbyes to Mrs. Chen, and neither of them saw him approach until he was already climbing the steps to the front door. "I want a word with Miss Vance," Thornton said, his voice cold and clipped. Ryder stepped between them immediately, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "You got your money, Thornton? Your business with Miss Vance is concluded." "I am not here to cause trouble," Thornton said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "I simply wanted to warn her that making accusations against respected businessmen can be very dangerous. People who stir up trouble tend to have unfortunate accidents." Laura felt fear spike through her, but she refused to let it show. She stepped around Ryder, meeting Thornton's cold gaze directly. "Is that a threat, Mr. Thornton?" "A word of advice," Thornton said smoothly. "From someone who has lived in Nevada longer than you. This territory has a way of dealing with troublemakers. It would be a shame if anything happened to you, or to your cowboy friend here." Ryder's voice when he spoke was soft and deadly. "I think you should leave now, Thornton. Before you say something you will regret." For a long moment, Thornton just stared at them, his eyes calculating. Then he smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. "Enjoy the ranch, Garrison. It is a shame about the water situation. Be a real tragedy if something happened to dry up that creek permanently." He turned and walked away, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Laura felt sick, realizing that standing up to Thornton had put not just her, but Ryder in danger as well. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I did not mean to make your situation with him worse." "You did not make anything worse," Ryder said firmly. "Thornton was already my enemy. Now he just knows that I am not afraid of him. Come on, let us get out of this town." The ride to the ranch took most of the day, following rough roads that wound through the Nevada landscape. Laura sat beside Ryder on the wagon seat, watching the scenery change from the harsh desert around Elko to rolling grasslands dotted with cattle and the occasional homestead. Ryder pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling her stories about the land and the people who had tried to make a living here. "It is not an easy place," he said, "but it is honest. The land does not lie to you. It tells you straight up what it is willing to give and what it will take from you. I have always appreciated that." The sun was setting when they finally turned down a long drive marked by a weathered wooden arch with a brand burned into the crossbeam, a stylized G that stood for Garrison. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill, a sturdy structure of wood and stone that looked like it had grown out of the land itself. It was not fancy, but it was well maintained, with a wide porch and shuttered windows and smoke rising from the chimney. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was somewhere in her 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair and a weathered face that broke into a smile when she saw Ryder. "About time you got back," she called. "I was starting to think you had gotten lost." "Takes more than a trip to Elko to lose me, Mrs. Patterson," Ryder said, hopping down from the wagon. He turned to help Laura down, his hands warm on her waist. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Laura Vance. Laura, this is Mrs. Patterson, who has been keeping this place running since before I was born." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes took in Laura's appearance, lingering on the healing cuts on her hands and the shadows that still haunted her face. But there was no judgment in that gaze, only kindness and a shrewd understanding. "Welcome to the ranch, Miss Vance." Ryder sent a telegram explaining the situation. "You will be safe here." "Thank you," Laura said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the simple acceptance in the older woman's voice. "I hope I can be helpful. Ryder said you might need assistance with the house and the books." "Lord knows I can use the help, Mrs. Patterson said. "These men track dirt through the house like it is their job, and Ryder's father could not balance an account book to save his life. I assume his son is the same. Come on inside. I will show you your room." The interior of the ranch house was as solid and comfortable as the exterior, with wide plank floors and sturdy furniture that had clearly been built to last. Mrs. Patterson led Laura upstairs to a small bedroom that overlooked the ranch yard, simply furnished with a bed, dresser, and a chair by the window. "It is not much, but it is clean, and the bed is comfortable," Mrs. Patterson said. "Washroom is at the end of the hall. We eat breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, and dinner at 7. You are welcome to help in the kitchen or just rest until you are feeling stronger. Ryder told me you have been through hell." "I am feeling much better," Laura said, "and I would like to help. Staying busy will be good for me." Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "You will fit in just fine here. Now, I will let you get settled. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." When Mrs. Patterson left, Laura sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the small room. It was hers, truly hers, for the first time in months. No one would come and drag her from sleep to go work in the mines. No one would stand guard at the door to make sure she did not run. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, and Ryder entered carrying her bag. "Forgot to bring this up," he said, setting it on the chair. Then he crossed to where she sat and knelt down so they were at eye level. "Are you all right? You look a little overwhelmed." "I am," Laura admitted. "But in a good way, I think. Your home is beautiful, Ryder. And Mrs. Patterson seems wonderful." "She is the best," Ryder agreed. "She practically raised me after my mother died. If she approves of you, and she clearly does, then you have an ally for life." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind Laura's ear, the gesture achingly intimate. "I am glad you are here." "So am I," Laura said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that Laura found deeply satisfying. She woke early to help Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, men who treated her with respect and a friendly distance that felt safe. After breakfast, she tackled the housework, cleaning and organizing with an energy that surprised her. In the afternoons, she worked on the ranch's books, discovering that she had a talent for numbers and record-keeping that made the tangled accounts start to make sense. But the best parts of the day were the times she spent with Ryder. He was busy with the work of running the ranch, repairing fences and tending cattle, and dealing with the ongoing water dispute with Thornton. But he always made time for her. They rode out together in the evenings, Ryder teaching her about the land and the business of ranching, Laura slowly regaining the strength and confidence that the mine had stripped away, and their relationship deepened with each passing day. The initial spark of attraction grew into something richer and more complex, a love built on respect and trust and genuine affection. They talked about everything, their pasts and their hopes for the future, their fears and their dreams. Ryder was unfailingly patient with Laura's occasional nightmares, the ones where she woke up convinced she was back in the mine. He would hold her until the fear passed, murmuring reassurances, never making her feel weak for struggling. "Everyone has scars," he told her one night after she had woken, gasping from a nightmare. "Yours are just more recent than most. Give yourself time to heal." Laura was falling deeper in love with him every day, and she could see the same emotion reflected in his eyes. They had not spoken of the future in concrete terms, both of them understanding that Laura needed time to truly recover, to become fully herself again before making any permanent decisions. But the love was there, unspoken but understood, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. A month after Laura arrived at the ranch, Marshal Hayes sent word that the investigation into Thornton was officially underway. The other workers from the Silver Crown mine had been released, their contracts declared invalid due to fraud. Several of them had given statements corroborating Laura's testimony, and more evidence of Thornton's illegal activities was coming to light every day. They found records of at least 20 other people he had trapped the same way, Ryder told Laura after reading the marshal's letter, and evidence that he was bribing local judges and law enforcement to look the other way. Hayes thinks they can get enough to bring criminal charges, maybe even shut down his operation entirely. Laura felt a fierce satisfaction at the news. Justice was slow, but it was coming. "What about the water rights issue?" Ryder's expression darkened. "That is more complicated. Thornton is fighting it hard, throwing money at lawyers and trying to delay any resolution. But with the criminal investigation underway, his influence is not what it was. I think we have a real chance of winning now." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the ranch, Ryder took Laura's hand in his. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about the future. About us." Laura's heart began to beat faster. "What about us?" "I love you," Ryder said simply. "I have loved you since the day I saw you at that mine, and every day since has only made me more certain. I know you need time, and I'm not trying to rush you, but I want you to know that when you are ready, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you here, on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want children with you, a family, a future." Tears filled Laura's eyes, but she was smiling through them. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I have been so scared to admit how much, because everything feels too good to be true. But it is true, is it not? This is real." "It is as real as anything I have ever known," Ryder said. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "This was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died, told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. I think he would have liked you, Laura. I think he would have been proud that I found someone as strong and brave as you." Laura looked at the ring, then at Ryder's face, and felt her heart swell with a happiness so intense it was almost painful. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not need more time to be certain. I am already certain." Ryder slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Patterson, watching from the kitchen window, smiled and turned away to give them privacy. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in the nearest town, with Mrs. Patterson and a few ranch hands as witnesses. Laura wore a dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Ryder wore his best suit, his hair slicked back and his face serious with the weight of the vows he was making. "I, Ryder Garrison, take you, Laura Vance, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and strong. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, until death parts us." Laura repeated the vows, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed her with such tenderness that she felt something deep inside her, some last piece of the fear and trauma she had carried, finally begin to heal. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. The ranch hands toasted the new couple with whiskey and good-natured ribbing, and Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears while insisting she was not crying at all. Laura danced with Ryder under the stars, feeling more complete and happy than she had ever imagined possible. That night, in the bedroom they now shared, Ryder made love to her with patience and care, erasing the last lingering shadows of fear with tenderness and passion. Laura gave herself to him completely, trusting him with all the broken and healing parts of herself, and found in their union something that felt like redemption. In the months that followed, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Laura took over more of the business side of the operation, her talent for numbers and organization helping to put the ranch on firmer financial footing. She also started corresponding with other women in the territory who had been victims of exploitation, helping to build a network of support and resources. It was deeply satisfying work, taking her own painful experience and using it to help others. The water rights case finally went to court in the spring, and with Thornton's influence waning in the face of the criminal charges against him, the judge ruled in the Garrison Ranch's favor. The creek belonged to them, legally and permanently, and Thornton was ordered to pay substantial damages for his interference. It was a victory that felt like justice, like Ryder's father's long fight had finally been vindicated. Thornton himself was convicted of labor fraud and multiple counts of corruption, sentenced to 15 years in a territorial prison. Laura attended the sentencing, wanting to see the man who had nearly destroyed her face the consequences of his actions. When Thornton was led away in chains, she felt not triumph, but simply relief. It was over. She was free, truly free, and she could finally stop looking over her shoulder. A year after their wedding, Laura discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her and Ryder with joy tempered by nervousness, both of them acutely aware of the fragility of life on the frontier. But Laura was strong and healthy now, fully recovered from her ordeal at the mine, and the pregnancy progressed smoothly under the care of the territory's best doctor, whom Ryder insisted on bringing in, despite the expense. Their son was born on a bright autumn morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire ranch. They named him Samuel, after Ryder's father, and the baby had his grandfather's stubbornness and his father's steady gaze. Holding her son for the first time, Laura felt a completeness she had never known, as if all the broken pieces of her life had finally come together into something beautiful and whole. Mrs. Patterson doted on the baby with the fervor of a grandmother, and the ranch hands treated the child like a communal treasure, fashioning toys from wood scraps and taking turns entertaining him when Laura and Ryder needed a break. The ranch itself thrived, growing in size and prosperity as word spread of the Garrison's fair treatment of workers and their commitment to honest business practices. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, and they named her Rose, after Ryder's mother. She had Laura's dark hair and Ryder's blue eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she was following her father around the ranch, determined to do everything her older brother could do. Laura watched her children grow with a gratitude that never faded, knowing how close she had come to losing everything, how different her life could have been if not for a cowboy who had been willing to stand up for a stranger. The years passed with the slow steadiness of a good life well lived. Laura and Ryder added to the ranch, expanding their herd and building new outbuildings. They helped establish a school in the area, ensuring that their children and those of the ranch hands had access to education. Laura continued her advocacy work, becoming known throughout Nevada as someone who fought for workers' rights and fair treatment. She testified before the territorial legislature, helped draft new laws protecting employees from exploitation, and worked tirelessly to ensure that what had happened to her could never happen to anyone else. Ryder stood beside her through all of it, proud of her accomplishments and supportive of her causes. Their partnership was one of equals, two people who had found in each other not just love, but genuine respect and admiration. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, but through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation on which they had built their lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ryder took Laura to the spot where they had first confessed their feelings for each other, the juniper tree on the edge of Elko, that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The tree was still there, twisted and weathered but enduring, much like their love. "I think about that day a lot," Ryder said, as they sat in the shade, his arm around her shoulders. "How scared I was that you would not feel the same way, that I had misread everything." "I was terrified too," Laura admitted, leaning against his solid warmth. "I thought I was being foolish, falling in love with someone who had every reason to see me as a charity project. But you never made me feel that way. You made me feel valuable, worthy of love and respect. You saved my life, Ryder, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Ryder corrected gently. "You gave me purpose after my father died, showed me that fighting for what is right is worth any cost. You made me a better man, Laura. Everything good in my life comes from the day I walked into that mine yard and saw you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the Nevada sun sink toward the horizon. Laura thought about the frightened, exhausted woman she had been, and about the person she had become, strong and confident and deeply loved. She thought about her children, growing up free and safe on a ranch built on honest work and fair treatment. She thought about the lives she had touched through her advocacy, the people who had been freed from situations similar to what she had endured. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "The money you spent to free me, the trouble it brought with Thornton, all of it?" Ryder turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious and full of love. "Not for a single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Laura. Everything else, the money, the trouble, the fights, none of it matters compared to what we have built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Laura kissed him, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude and partnership into that kiss. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious, a love that had been tested and had emerged stronger for it. As the sun set, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and crimson, they rode back to the ranch together, to the home they had built, to the children waiting for them, to the life they had created from the ashes of trauma and the seeds of courage. It was a good life, an honest life, and it was theirs, earned through struggle and sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to prosper. Samuel grew into a young man who shared his father's integrity and his mother's sharp mind, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch. Rose proved to have her mother's advocacy spirit, becoming a teacher and working to expand educational opportunities throughout the territory. Laura and Ryder watched their children flourish with pride, knowing they had given them the most important gifts: love, security, and the example of how to live with honor. More children came, 2 more sons and another daughter, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Each child was unique, each brought their own gifts and challenges, but all of them grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, that their parents' partnership was unshakable. That home was a place of safety and acceptance. Laura's work with workers' rights evolved as Nevada moved towards statehood, and she found herself consulted by lawmakers and business leaders who were shaping the future of the territory. The laws she helped pass became models for other states, protecting vulnerable workers and establishing standards for fair treatment. It was satisfying work, though it often kept her traveling, and she was always grateful to return home to Ryder and the ranch. Ryder aged gracefully, his dark hair silvering at the temples, his face gaining lines that spoke of laughter and sun rather than worry. He remained strong and capable, working the ranch alongside his sons, teaching them everything his father had taught him about the land and about being a man of integrity. He and Laura grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, becoming the kind of partnership that younger couples looked at with admiration and aspiration. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, the ranch threw a celebration that drew people from all over Nevada. Former workers from the Silver Crown mine, now free and building their own lives, came to thank Laura for her courage in standing up to Thornton. Families that the Garrisons had helped over the years, through hard times and natural disasters, came to celebrate with them. Friends and neighbors, business associates, and fellow advocates all gathered to honor a couple whose love story had become something of a legend in that part of the territory. As Laura stood on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, watching Ryder laugh with old friends, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She thought about the terrified woman she had been, hauling ore in a dark tunnel, convinced she would die in that mine. She thought about the moment Ryder Garrison had walked into that mine yard, a stranger who had become her salvation, her partner, her love, Mrs. Patterson, now well into her 70s but still sharp as a tack, came to stand beside Laura. "You have built something beautiful here," the older woman said quietly. "Your love, your family, your legacy. It is remarkable." "We built it together," Laura replied. "All of us. You, Ryder, the people who stood by us. I could not have done any of it alone." "Maybe not," Mrs. Patterson agreed. "But you had the courage to accept help when it was offered, and the strength to become someone who could offer help to others. That is what makes you remarkable, Laura Garrison." As the celebration continued into the night, Laura found Ryder and pulled him away from the crowd, leading him to their favorite spot overlooking the ranch. The Nevada sky was brilliant with stars, the air cool and clean, and everything was perfect. "Thank you," Laura said, taking his hand, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself, for loving me through everything." Ryder pulled her close, his arms strong and sure around her. "Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for being the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. Every day with you has been an adventure, Laura. I cannot wait to see what comes next." They stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built a love strong enough to withstand any challenge. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to what could be achieved through hard work, integrity, and genuine partnership. Their children and grandchildren laughed in the house behind them, the sound carrying on the Nevada wind, a promise that the legacy they had built would continue long after they were gone. It was a life neither of them could have imagined during those dark days when Laura was trapped in the mine and Ryder was mourning his father. But it was the life they had fought for, the life they had earned, and it was beautiful beyond measure. Years later, when they were both old and gray, sitting on that same porch watching another sunset, Ryder would turn to Laura and say, "I would do it all again, every moment, every struggle, every fight, as long as it brought me to you." And Laura, holding his weathered hand in hers, would smile and reply, "We did not just find each other, we saved each other, and then we built something that will outlast us both." They lived long, full lives, surrounded by family and love, their story becoming part of the fabric of Nevada history. When they died, years apart but never truly separated, they were laid to rest on the ranch they had built together, under the wide Nevada sky they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued their legacy, running the ranch with the same integrity their grandparents had established, fighting for justice and fair treatment in their own ways. The Silver Crown mine, once a place of suffering and exploitation, was shut down permanently, converted into a museum and memorial dedicated to the workers who had suffered there and to the woman who had found the courage to stand up and say enough. Laura's advocacy work led to significant reforms in labor law throughout the West, protecting countless workers from the kind of exploitation she had endured. But perhaps their greatest legacy was simply the love they had shared, the example they had set of what a true partnership could be. Couples throughout Nevada told the story of Laura and Ryder Garrison, the woman who had been forced to work in a mine, and the cowboy who had set her free and faced down the man who had enslaved her. It became a love story passed down through generations, a reminder that courage and compassion could change the world, that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the most powerful thing one person could do was stand up and fight for another. Their story was one of redemption and hope, of justice and partnership, of two souls finding each other against impossible odds and building something beautiful together. It was a love story for the ages, set against the harsh but honest landscape of the Wild West, and it endured long after the people who had lived it were gone, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of courage, compassion, and love. The end.